Alright, so here in this question, they're saying that for carbon dioxide, given that the average velocity at T1 is equal to the most probable velocity at T2, you have to find out the ratio of T1 by T2. Cool. So, see, basically, what do we know? We have to find out, okay, average velocity at T1 and most probable velocity at T2. For what? For carbon dioxide, okay, for carbon dioxide. So if they're talking about the same gas, okay, they're talking about the same gas, which means your M, molar mass, is going to remain the same. That is the takeaway from here. Now let's look at the formula for average velocity. So V average is nothing but under root of 8 RT by pi M, okay. So here, because they mentioned T1, I'm going to write T1 here as the temperature. What about most probable velocity? So V most probable is equal to under root of 2 RT, T is given to you as T2, by M. Okay, cool. Now these two values are said to be equal, which means under root of 8 RT1 by pi M is equal to under root of 2 RT2 by M. So now let's get cancelling. So M and M will get cancelled, R and R will get cancelled. Okay, this will cancel out once and you will get a 4 here, right? And see, since it's root on both sides, I can already square it. So what you get is 4 by pi T1 is equal to T2, right? I'm going to slightly reduce this. Okay, now you have to find out T1 by T2. So T1 by T2 is going to be nothing but pi by 4. Pi is nothing but 3.14. So 3.14 divided by 4. This is what you have. Now what you can do is you can make some approximations, okay? Or alternatively, see, look here. This 3.14 by 4, right? I can write this as 3 by 4 plus 0.14 by 4. Correct? So 3 by 4 is nothing but 0.75. So you get 0.75 here. Plus 0.14 by 4, what we can do is we can cancel it with 4 here if you want to. So this will cancel out once. You will get 0.03 or 3. What do we? Okay, sorry. We get 0.035. This is what you're getting. Okay, so 0.035. Which means what? Which means you get 0.785. This is what you're getting. 0.785 is the ratio. And you have it here in option C. So it's saying 0.78. We got 0.785. Perfectly acceptable. So option C, 0.78, is going to be the right answer to this question. Alright, so here they're saying that a certain volume of H2 effuses from an apparatus in 1 minute. Okay. The same volume of ozonized oxygen, that is O3 plus O2 mixture, took 246 seconds to effuse from the apparatus under identical conditions. Fine. So what does identical conditions mean? It means that your temperature and your pressure, your ambient conditions are maintained, right? They have not been changed. Nice. Cool. Find the percentage of oxygen in the ozonized oxygen. Okay, cool. So what they're saying here, first of all, is that your rate, right? Your rate of effusion, whatever you want to call it, rate of effusion is what we need to calculate. So we know that here we have to use this formula. What law is this? It's nothing but Graham's law of diffusion. So rate of diffusion is going to be inversely proportional to root of molar mass. Okay, that is the first thing. And another thing is that, you know, rate is nothing but volume of gas that has leaked per unit time. Okay, or divided by time, because here they are talking about it in terms of equal volume but different times. So you have to convert rate to V by T and then you have to talk about it. Okay, so see, so I'll say R of H2 by R of mixture. Your mixture is your ozonized mixture that they're talking about, is equal to under root of molar mass of mixture divided by molar mass of H2. Okay, now here instead of R of H2 and R of mixture, I'll write it as V divided by T of H2 and V divided by time for mixture, which means my V and V will get cancelled again. So now equation that you have to solve is T mix divided by TH2 is equal to under root of M mix divided by MH2. This is what you have to solve. So let's see, you have 246 seconds given as the time required for the mixture to effuse, and for hydrogen it was 1 minute or 60 seconds. This is equal to under root of molar mass of mixture divided by molar mass of hydrogen, which is nothing but 2 gram per mole. Okay, good. So now what we'll do is we'll cancel things out. This will go once, this will go for 41, right? So you have molar mass of mixture under root is equal to 4.1 into root 2, square it. Okay, so you get 2 into 4.1 square is equal to your molar mass of mixture. Okay, so 4.1 square is going to be what? It's going to be something around 16, right? So when you calculate, you can take 17, or to be precise, because I have calculated, I know that this value is going to be 16.8. Okay, 2 into 16.8 is what you get. So when you multiply this, you'll get 33.6 gram per mole as the molar mass of the mixture. Now this mixture is nothing but a mixture of ozone and oxygen. Okay, so you have ozone and oxygen, right? The molar mass is 33.6 gram per mole. Okay, so if I take 100 parts of this mixture, I'll say some 100 minus X parts is ozone. And what's going to be the molar mass of ozone? 16 into 3, so 48 gram per mole, plus some X parts of O2, which is 32 gram per mole, correct? Write this equation, solve for X, that X is going to be your answer. Okay, let's go ahead and solve this. Okay, also because we have taken 100 parts, divide this by 100. Okay, we are talking about it in terms of percentages. So now you get 3360 is equal to 4800 minus 16x, correct? So now you get, okay, what do you get? You get 3360 minus 4800 is equal to minus 16x, which means my x is going to be equal to 4800 minus 3360 divided by 16. So let's see what this comes out to be. This is going to be 0, 4, 4 and 1 divided by 16. Cool. So 144 is nothing but 12 square. Okay, so 12 square means 12 into 12 into 10 divided by 16. Of course, you could have gone ahead and just cancelled things out as per, right here. But like, I'm a fan of simple numbers and I am going to calculate it in the simplest possible way. This is going to be 4, 3 and 3. So this is going to be 90, which means your X is 90% or your percentage of oxygen is 90% and percentage of ozone is 10%. This is what you're getting, right? Okay. What is the percentage of oxygen that I got? I got 90%. And they were asking for percentage of oxygen only. So that's fine. Okay, where do you have 90%? You have 89.87. Very, very close. Okay, very close. We didn't have to make too many approximations. So the numbers were okay. Okay, they were not very difficult. So yes, we got a close enough answer. Not even close enough. I'd say even if you get 89.87% marks, according to me, you've gotten 90%. Okay, even according to yourself, you've gotten 90%. So yes, this is a very good number that we've gotten. So option A, 89.87 is definitely going to be the right answer to this question. Alright, so here they're saying find the equivalent weight of thiosulfate ion. Molar mass is given to you as M from the following reaction. Okay, and the reaction here is 2S2O32 minus gives you S4O62 minus plus 2 electrons. Okay, and S2O32 minus is stated to be a reducing agent. Cool, great. Okay, now what do we know? We know that equivalent weight, right, or equivalent mass, whatever you want to call it. Equivalent weight is going to be nothing but your molar mass divided by N factor. Okay, so what we'll do is first we'll find out the N factor for this given particular ion, right? So S2O32 minus gives you S4O62 minus plus 2 electrons, and you have a 2 here. Okay, so you have thiosulfate ion where let's say the oxidation state of sulfur is S. Okay, so 2S minus 6 is equal to minus 2. So S minus 3 is equal to minus 1, which means S is equal to plus 2. So here sulfur is in the oxidation state of plus 2. Then we have to find out similarly for sulfur in S4O62 minus. So here what happens is, let's say sulfur is in the oxidation state of S1. Okay, S1. So 4S1 minus 12 is equal to minus 2. Which means what? Which means 4S1 is equal to 10, or S1 is equal to plus 2.5. So here sulfur is in the oxidation state of plus 2.5. Okay. Now you can see that sulfur has undergone oxidation, right? The oxidation state of sulfur went from plus 2 to plus 2.5, which means this is oxidation. What is going to be the change in oxidation state? Change in oxidation state is 2.5 minus 2, which is nothing but 0.5. How do you find out the N factor? You will do change in oxidation state multiplied by number of sulfur atoms, right? Number of atoms on the reactant side. This is very important. So here what do you have? You have 0.5. Okay, you have 0.5 multiplied by 2 because you have 2 sulfur atoms here. Okay, so this is going to be nothing but 1. So your N factor for this change came out to be equal to 1. And now you have to find out the equivalent weight. Equivalent weight is nothing but molar mass, which is given to you as M, divided by N factor, which is 1. So equivalent weight of S2O3 2 minus, or your thiosulfate ion, for this chemical change is going to remain M. Now let's look for that in the options. M is here in option A. So option A, M, is going to be the right answer to this question. Metallic mercury is obtained by roasting mercury 2 sulfide in a limited amount of air. Fine. Estimate the temperature range in which the standard reaction is product favored. Okay, what does this mean? This statement basically might sound like a new thing to you, but they're saying estimate the temperature range where your reaction will proceed in the forward direction, where you are more likely to get the product. Okay, because it's not necessary that at every temperature every reaction is going to be feasible. Okay, so your reaction given is this: you have HgS plus O2 gives you Hg plus SO2. Fine. And they have given you the delta H naught value and the delta S naught value. Cool. And these are your options here. So here you have certain temperature ranges. Temperature greater than 200 Kelvin, temperature greater than 300 Kelvin. Option C, all temperatures, and option D, none of these. Cool. Let's see what's happening here. So here, what do we have? Okay. So what do we know? We know that for a reaction to be product favored, or for a reaction to happen in the forward direction, or for a reaction to happen at all, your delta G naught has to be less than 0. Okay, your change in Gibbs free energy has to be negative. What does that mean? We know the expression for Gibbs free energy is delta H minus T delta S. Okay, since we are talking about, we'll write delta H naught minus T delta S naught. This has to be less than 0. This has to be a negative value for whatever value of temperature. Delta H naught and delta S naught is given to us. So for whatever range of temperature, we're getting this entire value to be less than 0. That is going to be our answer. So let's see. Here you have minus 238.6 minus, 238.6 minus T into 36.57 is less than 0. Okay. Now, look here. So temperature, we know the temperature can't take a negative value, which means temperature has to be greater than 0, right? Absolute 0 is anyway just a theoretical concept. We have not been able to practically achieve absolute 0. So whatever the value of temperature, be it 0.001 or be it 0.1 Kelvin, whatever it is, that will have to be greater than 0. Okay, so here you have a value greater than 0. You have a positive value. Here this value is positive. Okay, which means you have this entire value greater than 0. Okay, so which means with the negative sign, that is going to be a negative quantity. This is also a negative quantity, right? So which means when you're adding two negative quantities, you are bound to get a negative quantity, right? You are bound to get this delta G naught value less than 0 for all temperatures. Okay, no matter what value of T you're putting, you put 1, 2, 3, 500, 600, 6000, whatever you're putting, the more you increase the temperature, delta G naught value is going to start decreasing even further. Okay, now that has got nothing to do with what we're saying. What I'm saying is for any temperature, the delta G naught value is going to be negative. Okay, which means what? If delta G naught value is negative, it means the reaction is feasible. Okay, so what can we say? For all temperature values, for any temperature, this reaction is going to be product favored. Okay, cool. So basically, what is my answer? My answer is option C, at all temperatures, which means C is going to be the right answer to this question. Okay, so here they're asking which of the following is a paramagnetic substance. Very quickly, what is the idea of a paramagnetic substance? Basically, a substance or any given ion, species, whatever it is, will show paramagnetic behavior if you have the presence of an unpaired electron. Okay, not just one, but any number of unpaired electrons are going to contribute to the presence of the paramagnetic behavior. So more your number of unpaired electrons, more will be the paramagnetic behavior. That is all like an entirely different discussion that you will have in physics. Here, what do we care about? We care about whether the substance is paramagnetic or not, whether it is paramagnetic or whether it is diamagnetic. So you have to find out whether you have unpaired electrons or not. If you have in any of these ions, if you have an unpaired electron, then that is going to become a paramagnetic substance. So let's go ahead and see. First you have option A, Mg2+. So option A, Mg2+, right? So here magnesium is going to be the atom that I'm starting with, right? It's going to be the element that I'm starting with. So what is the atomic number of magnesium? Atomic number of magnesium is nothing but 12. So for this, let's write down the electronic configuration. You have 1s2, 2s2, 2p6, 3s2. Okay, how many do we have? We have 2, 4, 6 and 10. Okay, we have our 12 electrons sorted here. Okay, alternatively, you could have just written neon core 3s2. Works, but I chose to write it like this. Anything is fine. Okay, so now for magnesium 2+, what happens? These last two electrons will get kicked out. Okay, so now what you have is a 3s0. So when you look at this electronic configuration, final electronic configuration of Mg2+, you have 1s2, 2s2, 2p6, right? Which means all your subshells are filled to the maximum capacity, and that means that the electrons in them are paired. Okay, so here you do not have any unpaired electrons, so which means this is going to be a diamagnetic species. Cool. Next, what do we have? We have Cu+. Okay. Option B, Cu+, copper+. So copper, whose atomic number is 29. Okay. Now for 29, what will we do? I'm going to go ahead and write the argon core, and from there I'm going to write the outer configuration. So here you have argon, which amounts to 18 electrons. Then you have your 3d and 4s. So first you will write 4s2, 3d, 9. This is what you would expect, but remember, very important, copper has an exceptional electronic configuration, so it will become 4s1, 3d, 10. Okay, this is the final electronic configuration of copper. Now, when you're talking about copper plus, what happens? This 4s1 becomes 4s0. Okay, the outermost electron. Basically, from 4s, we remove one electron, you get 4s0, then you have 3d10. Now you can see the 3d, which has 5 sub-shells. You have 5 orbitals in 3d, and all of them are fully filled, which means the electrons are completely paired. And of course, in your argon core, which is a noble gas configuration, there anyway everything is paired. So again, this is going to be a diamagnetic species. Okay, this is not paramagnetic. Then we have option C, Mn7+. Okay, cool. I'll take it here. Manganese 7+. What is the atomic number of manganese? 25. Okay, so atomic number of manganese is 25. So again, I'm going to put an argon core, which accounts for 18 electrons. Then you have your 3d, then you have your 4s. So 4s2, 3d, 5. This is what you have. Now manganese 7+ means we have to kick out 7 electrons. That is 4s0, 3d, 0. Okay, again we are left with only an inert gas core. You only have your core electrons left, which means everything is paired, and this is going to be a diamagnetic species yet again. Lastly, we have Ti2+, titanium 2+. So Ti2 plus. Okay, so titanium, what is going to be the atomic number? 22. Okay, this is 22. Then we have argon, 3D, 4s. So 4s2, then your 3D2. This is going to be the electronic configuration of titanium in its ground state. Now, let's talk about the titanium 2 plus ion. Here what happens is these are kicked out. Okay, your 4s electrons are kicked out. Be very careful. You have to understand that whenever you are talking about your 3D transition series, whenever you have to kick out electrons, first you will remove them from the 4s orbital. Okay, after that you come to 3D, because if you made the mistake of writing 3D0 4s2, then you will see that here your electrons are paired, and again this will also become diamagnetic, right? Then what do we do? Does this question not have an answer? No, then your approach is incorrect, right? So don't do this. Here instead the electronic configuration is going to look like this. Okay, so you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Here you put your 2 electrons and you have 2 unpaired electrons, because all your d orbitals are degenerate, which means they have the same energy right now. Okay, so they are degenerate, which means you have to fill one electron into each before you start pairing. You will not put 3d2 both electrons paired into a single orbital. Don't do that. Okay, so here you have this, and this is going to be paramagnetic in nature because it has 2 unpaired electrons. Be very careful. Here this is the right thing to do, not this. Okay, if you do this, it is incorrect. You need to go back to atomic structure and revise a lot of concepts if you have done the second thing. Okay, but anyway, I'm more than confident that you have not made this blunder. So this is going to be the paramagnetic species, which means option D, Ti2 plus, is going to be the right answer to this question.